In the beginning, they built us a better world. Our oil companies gained unimaginable riches and influence from the utopian visions they promised us. Now some say the oil is running out. According to them, our tomorrows will be a nightmarish world of scarcity. But much of this debate is a mirage, created by the oil giants themselves. A mirage which has been allowed to spread, unquestioned by governments and media alike. This is a film about how and why this mirage was created, and who profits from it.
I'm afraid of America. I'm afraid of the world. I'm afraid I can't help it. I'm afraid I can't. I'm afraid of America. I'm afraid of the world. I'm afraid I can't help it.
Our planet is a ball in space. It is 24,901.55 miles around, and it has a mass of 6 million billion kilograms. It is finite, and so is the amount of oil and gas we can extract from it. Naturally, extraction must reach a peak, and as anyone who's climbed a peak knows, what goes up must come down. Some experts argue oil production has peaked already. Others say decades from now. But they all agree on one thing. After peak oil comes depletion. And because our entire way of life is based on a century of cheap oil, depletion equals catastrophe.
During the Carter years, in every decade, we used as much oil as had been used in all of previous history.
The trouble with peak oil is not its scientific basis. Peak oil is far more elusive than that. In fact, it seems to appear and disappear as required. Our story begins with a war. During World War I, Congress forces America's oil giants to work together. Germany defeated, former commercial rivals make an unusual decision to work together permanently. In 1919, they form a lobby group, the American Petroleum Institute.
To foster foreign and domestic trade in American petroleum products, to promote in general the interests of the petroleum industry in all its branches.
To promote in general the interests of the petroleum industry, the American Petroleum Institute begins to issue weekly crude oil production statistics. It is an unprecedented move. The very next year, the federal agency charged with measuring such things makes a startling declaration. The US has only 6.7 billion barrels of oil left, including undiscovered oil fields. Enough to last for 6 years at most. If true, the result should have been disaster. The one thing the developed world had quickly developed was a lust for oil. Heavy industry should have ground to a halt. The whole country starved. In fact, the world's first documented peak oil crisis achieved only one thing: a huge spike in the price of oil. The oil fields never ran dry. The 1920 survey was off by the small matter of 1,900%. And with that, peak oil disappeared like a myth, a bad dream, a mirage, forgotten until 1949. The 1950s defined America's relationship with big oil. With the country awash in cheap fuel, Congress passed the largest single public works program in its history, the Interstate Highway System. which led to astronomical profits for Detroit's automakers. And of course, big oil. Cold War military spending simply entrenched these interests. Looking back, the result was inevitable. A permanent national addiction to oil. But as early as 1949, a brilliant geoscientist working at Shell Oil named Dr. M. King Hubbard arrived at what appeared to him a remarkable conclusion.
When the energy cost of recovering a barrel of oil becomes greater than the energy content of the oil, production will cease no matter what the monetary price may be.
He applied the principles of geology, physics, and mathematics to create what became known as Hubbard's curve, or peak. Hubbard believed the outlook was dire, whatever people called it. San Antonio, Texas, March 1956. Hubbard presents his findings before the American Petroleum Institute. He informs them that the US has at best 150 to 200 billion barrels of untapped oil reserves left. He predicts US oil production will peak in 1970. The rest of the world, 30 years later. And Hubbard explains that with peak oil comes scarcity, competition, inflation, and war. Now, the US Geological Survey warning of 1920 sent oil prices soaring, yet it was based on, at best, poor science. At worst, outright lies. And yet, in 1956, Hubbard presents the American Petroleum Institute with mathematical proof of a forthcoming global catastrophe. And what happens? Crude prices remain steadily low, for nearly 2 decades. But much of this debate is a mirage created by the oil giants themselves. The problem with a mirage is that it makes you see stuff that isn't there. Unfortunately, it also obscures things that really are. Confused? So was Hubbard. But when in 1961, the Kennedy administration requested estimates of projected US oil reserves, Hubbard was happy to oblige. Unfortunately, so were our old friends, the US Geological Survey. Their chief geologist told Kennedy that the US had 590 billion barrels of untapped oil reserves left. 3 times Hubbard's best-case scenario. It isn't hard to guess which outlook gained official favor.